Going into the Preakness, there's a lot of news surrounding the fact that Rich Strike isn't running. But I'm surprised at the fact that Secret Oath running against the boys isn't getting more attention. She's shown she's top class against the girls and was very competitive in the Arkansas Derby despite a terrible trip. I'd like to know, why is a filly running with the colts such a rare occurrence?
So as a horse trainer, your job is to literally find the easiest race for your horse possible to win. It's not easy to win races in horse racing. And so to put your horse in the easiest spot possible, get your horse to win the most races, running fillies against the boys is not done that often. Not saying that fillies cannot compete with boys, because they certainly can. A lot of it comes down to, if I have the chance to run my superior filly against fillies, why not take that shot versus having a chance to lose by taking on the boys. So that's typically why it's not done. You see it a lot more in Europe, and a lot of that comes down to most horses are running on wider tracks. They might be sprinting straight. There's a lot more things that can prevent people from wanting to run fillies against the boys in the United States.
So you mentioned that you would rather have your filly win against top class fillies than compete against the boys. If she were to win against the boys versus the fillies, how much does that increase her value?
Oh, exponentially. So Secret Oath, probably prior to the Kentucky Oaks, was worth anywhere between, 500,000 to $1 million. She wins the Kentucky Oaks and now she's worth $4 million. So losing against the boys is not going to detract from her value as a broodmare or racing prospect. So now she has the freedom to take on the boys in the Preakness. And if she was to beat the boys, as you've seen with some of these mares like Havre de Grace and other mares who've taken on boys and have done well, her value as a broodmare can skyrocket from 4 million to 8 million to 10 million. And so it is a big piece when you do win against boys, because it puts that mare in a whole new light in terms of what she's viewed as in terms of her breeding value.
What type of mare do you need to beat the boys?
You need a very mentally tough mare. I think a lot of people like to talk about the physicality. Zenyatta was a very big mare. Rachel Alexander was a pretty sizable mare. Winning Colors had a good enough size to her. She wasn't huge. But when you look at some of these mares, they do tend to be bigger, and not saying that's a component. It does help them in terms of their physicality of being able to compete. But if you are not mentally tough, you cannot take on the boys, because what typically happens in those races is a lot of these jockeys will try and intimidate a filly in a race by either swinging her wide on a turn or pinning her on the fence, because they know that she is the horse potentially to beat. And if they have a horse that can intimidate her, it lends to them and others having a better shot of winning the race.
Well, why would a colt be much more intimidating than, say, a mare or a filly of a similar size?
A lot of it comes down to size and strength, I believe. Even with a mare like Zenyatta, if you were to take a colt that's equally the same size, he's going to be heavier. Boys do tend to be, not saying fillies are not, you see it in the paddock with brood mares all the time. Boys tend to have a little bit more aggressive testosterone against them. And you can liken this to human athletics. And think of yourself in a running race where you're running in the Olympics, where you're not in your own individual lane. And you sometimes see the girls elbowing each other and jockeying position in some of these different races on those tracks. Now put a boy against them and have that happen, getting jostled around and pushed around and elbowed, knocked around. It is intimidating, and you do feel it a little bit more than you would against the fillies. So that's kind of how that comes more into play when you're running colts with fillies.
Would you say then that it's fair to put a filly in that situation against the boys?
I don't think it's not. I've run fillies against boys when I was a trainer, and a lot of them had no issue with it. But a lot of it comes down to giving them the opportunity to put their best foot forward. So don't change the running style. Let them perform in a way that's natural to them, and then try and keep them out of as much trouble as possible. And so if you have a filly that has speed and she breaks and she doesn't break well, don't try and tuck in on the fence in hopes that you're going to get her loose and allow somebody to pin her in. Maybe pull her out and see if you can sit out in the second and third path and then stalk the leader and then take the lead. But You want to try and give them as clean a run as possible versus putting them in a position that could compromise them.
You mentioned the boys having an intimidation factor against the fillies. Well, how much does it affect the boys and their hormones and those testosterone levels to have to run against the fillies? Does it affect them at all?
There are certain boys that it completely takes their mind off business. Most don't. When you're in a competitive environment, you're in a competitive environment. It might be a little bit different in human athletics. I think as I've played sports where we had phenomenal girls teams that wanted to take on us to see how they matched up, and we played very differently against them. It's not the same in horse racing. A lot of it comes down to you're running a race, and they breeze against horses. They train against, colts and fillies breeze and train together all morning long. They're used to it. It's not that big a difference going in the afternoon, but you will get some boys that it does take their mind off business, and sometimes that can be an advantage.
Secret Oath previously ran against the boys in the Arkansas Derby. Based on that race, how do you felt like she stood up to them?
I thought she ran a phenomenal race, and personally, I think it was complete jockey error that caused her to lose the race. Every horse has a certain distance that they can run their top speed, and I'm talking shifting to fifth gear. So you'll see most horses in a race, we'll call it cruising speed, and we'll liken it to a car. That's fourth gear. There's still another gear on a lot of these upper caliber horses. And when you shift to fifth gear, it's like hitting that nitro button on a race car. You have a certain amount of time to use it. And some horses that can be 3/8 of a mile, which is rare. A lot of horses it's just a quarter mile. Some it's 3/16 of a mile. And so she seems to have a sustained run and an impressive turn of foot that lasts a little bit over a quarter mile, but not too much longer. And they moved far too soon. So as she was picking up horses, you saw her flatten. And it wasn't because she was tired. It's fifth gear's used up and she had to shift back into fourth and couldn't make up ground on these horses any further.
So what does she need to do in order to beat the boys in the Preakness?
I think she needs to lay. Everybody says that the track has a speed bias. I disagree. You've seen horses come from off the pace and win this race. I think basically she needs to put herself in a stalking position or just behind the leaders, sit on the outside, give her one clean run to take that acceleration that she has, which is devastating, and then kick for home. Her acceleration gear is one that I have not seen in a colt this year. I have not seen in any horse this year. And it breaks, and Wayne Lucas has said it, break their hearts. When you're running as hard as you can and something runs past you like you are standing in quicksand, it breaks your heart. It breaks you physically and it breaks you mentally. And making sure that that's used, and Luis will know when to use it at the right time, is crucial for her beating the boys in this race.
So I believe that Luis rode her for the first time in the Kentucky Derby. Seemed to mesh really well with her. Why do you think that they had, without knowing each other and him riding her for the first time, why do you think that she had such a good run with him?
Yeah, so when he rode her in the Kentucky Oaks for the first time, they really, Luis has a way with fillies. And I put him on a very, very difficult filly before when I trained. Nobody got along with her except Luis. He's very good with fillies and he's very good at understanding them. What makes Luis such a phenomenal rider is his feel for a horse and understanding what he needs to do to help that horse bring their talent out. Whether it's finessing them a bit more or putting them in a position that helps them pick up their confidence. I've noticed with him, if you put him on a horse that needs to find themselves, he's the one that can help them find themselves and get comfortable, and he's very in tune with the horses he rides.
So with the greatest fillies of all time, obviously it's going to be subjective. Where do you think Secret Oath stacks up with Rachel's, Zenyatta, Winning Colors, Azeri? Who do you think stacks up to her, and where does she lie in that detail?
I think Rachel's probably the best. Zenyatta was phenomenal. I mean, they're all phenomenal fillies in their own time, and it's hard to compare. But I do think we have not seen the best from this mare yet. I do think we saw a glimpse of her in the Kentucky Oaks. I think there's a lot more in the tank. I think you're going to see it in the Preakness. I think you're going to see the best of her come this summer. And I would not be surprised if she's the type of filly that we're crowning as horse of the year come the end of the season. So I do think she's going to be in the conversation.